The clock struck 10:47 when Arthur Flagenheimer made the biggest mistake of his life. Not the kind of mistake where you lose money or embarrass yourself. The kind where you sign your own death warrant with a .45 automatic and 11 witnesses watching. Most people knew him by another name, Dutch Schultz. The Bronx beer baron who'd built an empire on Prohibition liquor and Harlem numbers. A man who'd killed without hesitation, ruled without mercy, and never backed down from anyone. Until tonight. Tonight, he'd learned that some lines you don't cross, some men you don't threaten, and some systems are bigger than any individual ego. What happened in that smoke-filled hotel suite on October 15th, 1935, would echo through the underworld for decades. It was the night Dutch Schultz pulled a gun on the most powerful man in organized crime. The night he challenged a system that had brought order to chaos. The night he dug his own grave with his pride and sealed it with his stupidity. Because when you threaten Lucky Luciano in front of the entire commission, you're not just threatening a man, you're threatening the future itself. And the future has a way of fighting back. To understand how Dutch Schultz became a dead man walking, you need to understand what was happening to organized crime in 1935. For the first time in history, someone was actually winning the war against the mob. His name was Thomas Dewey, and he was everything the old guard feared. Young, incorruptible, and absolutely relentless. Dewey wasn't playing by the traditional rules where prosecutors could be bought, intimidated, or simply made to disappear. He was building cases with methodical precision, flipping witnesses, following money trails, and securing convictions against men who'd considered themselves untouchable. Within 18 months, Dewey had already put 3 major crime figures behind bars. He wasn't just making arrests. He was dismantling organizations piece by piece, using modern investigative techniques that the old-school bosses didn't understand. The days of simply bribing a judge or scaring off a prosecutor were over. Dewey represented something new, something dangerous. He represented the law with teeth. Dutch Schultz was feeling that pressure more than anyone else. Dewey had been building a case against his numbers operation in Harlem for months. The prosecutor had witnesses who testified to grand juries. He had ledgers that detailed every transaction. He had evidence that could put Dutch away for 2 decades. At 43 years old, Dutch knew what a 20-year sentence meant. It meant dying in prison. It meant watching his empire crumble while he rotted in a cell. It meant everything he'd built turning to dust. So Dutch decided to solve the problem the only way he knew how. Kill Thomas Dewey. Make it look like a random street crime. Some desperate punk catches the prosecutor walking to his car after dark. 2 bullets, 1 problem solved. It was simple, direct, and absolutely insane. Because there was one thing standing between Dutch and his solution, the commission. Lucky Luciano had founded the commission 4 years earlier after ending the bloodiest war in organized crime history. The concept was revolutionary for its time. 5 families, equal representation, disputes settled through discussion rather than bullets. No more single boss ruling over everyone. No more blood feuds that lasted generations and destroyed entire organizations. The commission had brought structure to chaos, profit to violence, and stability to an inherently unstable business. But with structure came rules, and the most important rule was simple. You didn't make moves that brought heat down on everyone. You didn't do anything that would wake up the federal government and bring them crashing down on the entire organization with unprecedented fury. Killing a federal prosecutor wasn't just murder. It was organizational suicide. It would bring every law enforcement agency in the country hunting organized crime with a vengeance they'd never seen before. Dutch didn't care about rules. He'd never liked the commission anyway. Too much talking, too much democracy, too much compromise. In the old days, bosses made decisions and soldiers followed orders. Simple, effective, final. This new system where you had to convince people, where you had to build consensus, where every major decision required a vote, it went against everything Dutch believed about how power should work. On October 15, 1935, Dutch called an emergency commission meeting. He wanted official approval to eliminate Thomas Dewey, not because he needed permission. Dutch Schultz had never asked permission for anything. but because he was smart enough to understand politics. If he acted alone and something went wrong, the other families might cut him loose to save themselves. Better to get them all on record supporting the decision. That way they'd all be complicit. They'd all be invested in making sure it worked. The meeting was scheduled for 10 o'clock that night at the Waldorf Astoria Hotel, Suite 39C, neutral territory where no single family held advantage. The location itself was symbolic. Expensive, elegant, respectable. The kind of place where legitimate businessmen met to discuss legitimate business. Except the business they were discussing was murder, and the men attending had built their fortunes on violence that would make most people sick. When Dutch walked into that suite, he was walking into a room filled with the most dangerous men in America. Lucky Luciano sat at the head of the conference table, not because he was the boss. The commission didn't have a single boss, but because everyone recognized him as the architect of this system, the visionary who'd seen a better way forward and convinced others to follow him. To his right sat Meyer Lansky, the financial genius who'd turned street crime into corporate enterprise. To his left, Frank Costello, the political fixer who could make problems disappear with a phone call. Around the table sat the other power brokers: Joe Bonanno, Tommy Lucchese, Joe Profaci, Albert Anastasia. Men whose names carried weight in the underworld. Men who controlled territories, commanded armies, and decided who lived and who died. And at the far end of the table, isolated by his own reputation for violence and unpredictability, sat Dutch Schultz. The meeting started civilly enough. Cigars were lit, whiskey was poured, and the pretense of civilization masked the brutal reality of what these men represented. Dutch got straight to the point because subtlety had never been his strength. Thomas Dewey was a problem that threatened them all. He was building cases against half the men in that room. He had witnesses who were talking, evidence that was mounting, grand juries that were listening. If he succeeded in putting Dutch away, he'd come for the rest of them next. They needed to handle this situation before it got worse. Lucky asked the question everyone knew was coming. Handle it how? Dutch's answer was direct and simple. They would kill Thomas Dewey. Make it look like a random mugging gone wrong. A prosecutor shot while walking to his car in the wrong neighborhood. It happened all the time in New York. Nobody would look too closely at just another street crime. The room shifted uncomfortably because everyone understood what Dutch was really proposing. This wasn't just murder. This was declaring war on the federal government. It would bring heat down on organized crime like nothing they'd ever experienced. Every law enforcement agency in the country would mobilize against them. The FBI, the Treasury Department, local police, federal marshals. Everyone with a badge would be hunting them with unprecedented resources and unlimited determination. Lucky leaned forward and asked Dutch a simple question that cut to the heart of the matter. What happens after you kill Dewey? Dutch's answer revealed how little he understood about consequences. The heat would die down, and they'd go back to business as usual. Lucky's response was quiet, but carried the weight of absolute certainty. The heat wouldn't die down. It would multiply. They'd send 20 prosecutors to replace Dewey, then 50. They wouldn't stop until every man in that room was either in prison or dead. That's when Dutch Schultz made the mistake that would cost him everything. He called Lucky soft, said the commission was leading them all off a cliff, declared that this was war, and in war, you kill the enemy. The room tensed because everyone knew Dutch was crossing a line that shouldn't be crossed. You could disagree with Lucky Luciano. You could argue with his decisions, but you didn't disrespect him in front of the entire commission. Lucky called for a vote because that's how the system worked, all in favor of authorizing action against Thomas Dewey. Dutch's hand shot up immediately. Nobody else moved, all opposed. 11 hands rose in unison. Every man except Dutch. The motion failed decisively, 11-1. Lucky's verdict was final. They wouldn't touch Dewey. Dutch needed to find another way, leave the jurisdiction, take an extended vacation in Europe, but killing a federal prosecutor was absolutely off the table. And that's when Dutch Schultz completely lost control. Dutch stood up so fast his chair crashed backward against the wall. His face turned crimson, veins bulging in his neck like twisted cables ready to snap. His hands trembled, not from fear, but from pure, uncontrolled rage that had been building for months. The kind of rage that makes men do things they can't take back. "You're telling me no?" Dutch's voice echoed through the suite like thunder. "Me? I built my empire while you were running numbers on street corners, Luciano. I earned my place in this city with blood and bullets, and now you think you can tell me what I can and can't do." "The commission voted," Lucky said calmly, his voice steady as granite. 11-1. "That's how this works, Dutch. That's how it's always worked." Dutch's response came out like venom. "Screw your commission." His hand moved toward his jacket, fingers dancing near the steel that had solved so many problems before. "You know what your problem is, Lucky. You forgot where you came from. You forgot this business is built on blood, not boardroom votes." Meyer Lansky started to rise from his chair, recognizing the danger signs. "Dutch, calm yourself down." "Sit down, Meyer," Dutch barked, his hand disappearing inside his jacket. The room transformed in an instant. Every man at that table was armed. Most had killed before. They all recognized what was about to happen. The air itself seemed to crackle with electricity as 12 of the most dangerous men in America prepared for violence. Dutch pulled out his .45 automatic, the metal catching the light from the chandelier overhead. He cocked it with a sound that seemed to echo forever in the suddenly silent room. Then he aimed it directly at Lucky Luciano's head. 3 feet away, point-blank range. Impossible to miss. The silence that followed was absolute. Not the kind where conversation stops, but where breathing stops. Where heartbeats seem too loud. Where time itself holds its breath. 12 men frozen in a moment that would either end with handshakes or body bags. Dutch's finger rested on the trigger, his hand steady now. The shaking rage crystallized into cold, calculated murder. "Here's my vote," Dutch said quietly, his voice carrying the finality of a judge pronouncing sentence. Lucky Luciano didn't reach for his gun, didn't call for help, didn't even lean back in his chair. He just looked at Dutch Schultz with those calculating eyes that had built an empire while other men were still figuring out which corner to work. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. "You pull that trigger, Dutch, and you better make sure you kill every man in this room." Dutch's eyes flickered with confusion because that wasn't the response he'd expected. Lucky continued, each word measured and precise. "The second I'm dead, you've got 11 enemies, 11 families, 11 organizations that will spend every dollar they have, call in every favor they're owed, sacrifice every soldier they command to make sure you die screaming. They work for me," Dutch snarled, but his voice cracked slightly, betraying the doubt that was creeping in. "They work for the commission," Lucky corrected. "That's the whole point, Dutch. No one man is bigger than the organization. Not me, not you. You kill me, you're not killing a boss. You're killing the system, and systems don't die with one bullet." Meyer's voice cut through the tension, steady and reasonable. "Put it down, Dutch. You're not thinking clearly." "I'm thinking perfectly clear," Dutch said, but his gun hand wavered slightly. "You all think Lucky's so smart, but he's leading you off a cliff. Dewey is going to put us all away, and Lucky wants us to sit here and take it like sheep." "No," Lucky said, his voice never rising above conversational level. "I want us to be smart. You kill Dewey, the government destroys all of us. You kill me, these men destroy you. Either way, you lose. The question is whether you're smart enough to see it." Dutch's face contorted with fury. "I built my empire by not backing down from anyone. And you'll die the same way," Lucky replied. "Is that what you want, Dutch? You want to be remembered as the man who was so stupid, so short-sighted, that he destroyed everything we built because he was too proud to listen to reason?" Dutch Schultz stood there for 30 seconds that felt like 30 years, gun raised, staring at Lucky Luciano. Then slowly, he lowered the weapon. 8 days later, 2 men with shotguns walked into a Newark restaurant and ended Dutch's story forever. Sometimes the grave you dig isn't in the ground. Sometimes it's dug with words, with pride, with one moment of uncontrolled rage that seals your fate forever.